the Wehrmacht. An army conquers Europe in the name of its commander-in-chief, Adolf Hitler. They've pledged allegiance to him, to the death. And the death they bring also strikes the defenseless, the unarmed, civilians, Jews. Crimes and criminal commands. Only one force in Germany could put a stop to them: the Wehrmacht, its generals, officers, soldiers. Only a few realize the war will lead to ruin, for the occupied countries as well as for Germany. This is the military resistance. Most remain loyal. The result? Missed opportunities and isolated acts of heroism. (1941), the third year of the war. The Wehrmacht marches deeper and deeper into the Soviet Union. Propaganda announces wave after wave of victories, a tide pulling in millions of soldiers. Führer command, we will follow you. Words that still resonate in the minds of the war generation.
In those days, to 20-year-olds like us, every word Adolf Hitler said was law.
Sometimes you just don't think that far. You're much more worried about, will I get enough to eat? When can I sleep? When will we get clean clothes? And what's going on at home?
What could we have done against this huge machine? It was so enormous.
As ordinary soldiers, we weren't in any position to say, right, let's put an end to this nonsense.
They didn't do anything. You couldn't do anything. Let's say there were 5 officers in a regiment who wanted to kill Hitler. How would they do it? I never saw that happen.
It was so pointless. You just blocked out the thought of trying anything, and you said there's nothing you can do.
Nevertheless, individual soldiers do try to swim against the tide by letting a prisoner escape or refusing to obey an order. The resistance of the simple soldier. The Wehrmacht senior generals have long been aware there's something wrong about this war. Increasingly, Hitler dictates every single military decision. Hitler, the private, the amateur strategist, driven by ideological mania. Nevertheless, only a few are prepared to consider high treason. They share many of Hitler's war aims. Since the winter of 1941, when the attack on Moscow got stuck in the Russian snowstorms, this war is de facto lost. But Hitler clings to his plans for conquest. A few individuals in the German military leadership realize that the war is heading for catastrophic defeat. Is that the reason for their opposition to Hitler? Do they want to achieve an advantageous peace agreement with the Western powers, perhaps even still win the war? Or is their resistance based on morality? The war in the East is a dirty war, a war of annihilation. Do the men of the resistance want to stop the inhumanity, the murdering? On the staff of Army Group Center on the Eastern Front near Borisov, there are officers whose determination to change course has been growing since 1941. "40-year-old Colonel Henning von Treschow comes from a Prussian military family. He enlisted at 16 and was a lieutenant in the First World War. He was a member of an elite unit, the 9th Potsdam Infantry Regiment, and he's highly respected by his fellow officers.
He was that kind of person. The minute he came into a room, he became the center of attention. Not because of what he said or because he was elegantly dressed or anything like that, but because of his manner, his clarity of expression, his analytical mind when he assessed a situation and gave his opinion. It was a pleasure, linguistically and in its content. A well-rounded personality, highly educated and highly intelligent. He was really very fascinating.
Behind closed doors, Tresco speaks frankly to his fellow officers. From the initial vague ideas about removing Hitler, a sophisticated plan emerges. Heinz Drossel also joined the 9th Potsdam Infantry Regiment in 1939, and he's later stationed in Russia. Like Tresco, he's a devout Christian. One day, he wanders off from his unit during a break and walks into the countryside.
I came to a forest and looked down into a valley that was encircled by hills. And I saw a mass grave, perhaps 3 or 4 meters wide and 60 or 70 meters in length. The grave was filled with corpses, all dressed in clothing that was typical of Jewish people. More of them were kneeling, and behind them were soldiers in German uniforms with pistols or submachine guns in their hands. Directly below me, a little boy was standing. I would estimate him to be about 6 years old. He kept reaching for the person kneeling to his right, and the soldier, standing behind him, kept hitting his arm down rather brutally.
Der Soldat hinter ihm schlug ihm immer den Arm ziemlich brutal herunter.
When the boy reached to the right again, the man took his gun, shot the child in the back of the head, and kicked him into the grave.
Gab dem Kind einen Genickschuss und stieß ihn mit dem Fuß in das Grab hinein.
It was a turning point. The Nazi regime had forfeited any claim to his allegiance. Heinz Drossel doesn't see Russians and Ukrainians as the enemy, but as warm-hearted people, an experience shared by many other German soldiers. Not long after, Heinz Drossel is escorting a captured Red Army commissar to the rear. According to the commissar order, he will be shot in violation of international law.
When we got to a place where we couldn't be seen from anywhere, and a path went off into the forest to the left, I said to him, "Naljevo, left, go left," and he did. Was he, I thought about this a lot later, was he thinking, now's the moment when you're going to be killed? But I called to him, "Don't be afraid, I'm not a murderer, I'm a human being."
Tiny acts of resistance, carelessness, misunderstanding orders, or ignoring them. And for a handful of officers on the Eastern Front, resistance means full-scale conspiracy, with all its consequences. Henning von Tresco's circle is soon discussing just one topic. How can Adolf Hitler be deposed or removed? But as long as the Wehrmacht is still winning victories, most remain loyal followers against their better judgment. Why are so few prepared to take a stand? The files of the British Secret Service in London provide an answer. Until recently, these files, discovered by historian Sönke Neitzel, were top secret. They're transcripts of private conversations between German generals and staff officers held prisoner by the British. The secretly recorded conversations make it clear why so few of the generals were prepared to oppose Hitler.
They say it themselves. We have Hitler to thank for our success. He gave us our jobs, and we can't turn against him now. It was certainly significant that these people received no promotions during the time of the Reichswehr during the Weimar Republic. And their careers only took off when Hitler came to power. They start getting promoted in the mid-30s, and then they make general. They join the ranks of the generals, and that impresses them, and they're grateful, and that makes them loyal.
The Nazi state has purchased their loyalty. Trent Park, near London. All the German generals captured in the West are held here. The building is luxuriously appointed, and every centimetre is monitored by hidden microphones. A rear admiral and a colonel can speak freely here. They're high-ranking officers, but they don't see themselves as responsible for anything.
That's what I mean. That's just what the senior Wehrmacht officers failed to say with one voice. We refuse to take part in these atrocities. They are a disgrace to the name of Germany.
The few that didn't fare too well.
But if they had all just done so at the right time, for historians, it will be one of the great puzzles of world history, the fact that something like this was actually possible.
This is a historic guilt of the German generals that together they didn't prevent these atrocities, which began with the war. Bock, Manstein, Leib, Rundstedt, they share the most guilt because surely only the upper echelons were in a position to defy the Supreme Commander.
That should have happened in 1933, 1934 when it all began.
When it all began, most of the officers had no inkling of the coming disaster. On the contrary, on Potsdam Day, the 9th Infantry Regiment paraded for Hitler and his henchmen. They hoped that Hitler, the strong man, would give the army more money and more influence. Even Henning von Tresckow at first welcomed Hitler's takeover. Many senior officers like him were carried away with enthusiasm for a new beginning. Only later do they realize that Hitler is capable of anything. The prisoners in Trent Park speak quite openly about this. The British Secret Service transcribe every single conversation. It's a colossal task, for in their enforced idleness, the prisoners talk all the time. Not knowing they're being recorded, they admit to their initial enthusiasm for Hitler.
How healthy National Socialism was in the beginning. We worked like pack horses for the Nazis.
A pity. Those boys had to commit such atrocities.
At the beginning, I always used to say, oh, it won't be that bad. You can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. I used to think they were just minor flaws.
The oath to the Führer was another flaw. Since 1934, soldiers of the Wehrmacht had to pledge their allegiance direct to Hitler. It was both subservient and unconstitutional. Yet the Wehrmacht's leaders had suggested it themselves. The oath had far-reaching consequences. It made it difficult for most soldiers to question Hitler's orders. The captured generals also discussed the importance of the oath to Hitler.
Do you still feel bound by the oath of allegiance?
Yes. Well, the oath of allegiance applies as long as the Führer lives.
Do you consider the Führer mentally stable?
You cannot allow a subordinate to determine whether his superior is mentally intact or not.
Servility in the highest ranks of the army. The oath of allegiance meant something for a long time, even for members of the resistance.
The oath formed a very strong bond, which was, of course, its purpose. And there were countless numbers of people who considered themselves bound by it to the very end. On the other hand, one can only say to those people that an oath is a pledge made by both parties to each other, and Hitler broke his oath repeatedly with his crimes.
Walter von Stülpnagel took part in the war against the Soviet Union as a young lieutenant. His father, General Karl Heinrich von Stülpnagel, has opposed Hitler's warmongering since the Sudeten crisis of 1938. even if he still uses the Hitler salute. For him, Hitler is a gambler, leading Germany to disaster. In the summer of 1941, General von Stülpnagel faces a decision. He must show his true colors. Is he just furious about Hitler's military ignorance? Or is he appalled by the war crimes? Stülpnagel is commander of the 17th Army, which is invading Galicia. The Jews, above all, are the victims of the Wehrmacht's occupation. Behind the front lines, the special task forces of the SS engage in genocide. Historian Christian Streit has documented how Stülpnagel's 17th Army Command cooperated closely with the death squads. Stülpnagel issued orders that fanned anti-Semitic feelings.
At first, Stülpnagel toughened up orders that already existed. For instance, when partisans were captured, they were to be shot immediately. And acts of sabotage, or even passive resistance, should be crushed by so-called collective punishment. But significantly, Stülpnagel directed this order particularly at the Jewish population. He ordered that when reprisals were being planned, they should seek out communists and Jews, especially the Jewish Komsomol, members of the Communist Party's youth organization. They should be considered instigators of guerrilla warfare and should be hunted down.
Jewish Bolshevism, a common enemy that unites the Wehrmacht and Nazi fanatics. Stülpnagel gives the SS considerably more freedom of action than they should have had, according to the original agreements. Stülpnagel's orders step up the persecutions. He asks the SS to conduct reprisals against the Jews and demands an intensified war against international Jewry. The reprisals continue to increase in scale. Random sweeps and executions escalate into systematic genocide. But at the beginning of October 1941, Stülpnagel takes sick leave. He considers Hitler's assessments of the military situation to be completely unrealistic. He sees his soldiers being sent to their deaths without reason. Stülpnagel is replaced as the commander of the 17th Army. There is no written explanation for his decision.
My father couldn't come to terms with the entire leadership of the war, and so he had himself relieved from his post, for two reasons. For strategic reasons and for political reasons.
Was General von Stülpnagel's conscience troubling him, or was it just a difference of military opinion?
He considered the treatment of the Ukrainian people to have been completely wrong. The Ukrainians had greeted German troops as liberators, only to realize that Hitler would treat them in just the same way as he treated the Russians, as subhuman. And that's when my father said, "I don't want to be part of this."
Russians and Ukrainians are regarded as subhuman, and especially Jews. Karl-Heinz von Stülpnagel, the general who only a few weeks earlier had stepped up the persecution of the Jews, would soon join the ranks of the resistance. More than 1 million Jewish people are murdered in the Soviet Union, mainly by Himmler's SS. Colonel Henning von Trescow is now operations officer in Army Group Center. He's responsible for over 1 million soldiers. His strategic planning is meant to contribute to a rapid victory over the Soviet Union. But terrible crimes are committed in his sphere of responsibility. What is Trescow's attitude at this point in time? Historians cannot agree. Johannes Hürter has discovered documents that prove that Tresco knew about the murders. Did he try to do anything to prevent them? Could he have done anything? This series of reports from July 1941 lists in great detail the executions of Jews behind the front lines. They all cross Tresco's desk, and they're signed with his initials, 1AT, Tresco, Operations Officer. Some of Tresco's co-conspirators also initialed the documents.
Die Dokumente, die ich gefunden habe, belegen
The documents I have found prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that at that time they were fully aware that hundreds and thousands of Jewish men were being shot.
Und sie haben dagegen nichts unternommen,
And they didn't do anything about it, even though they could have. For at that time it was still possible to limit the freedom of movement of Himmler's death squads, but they chose not to do so.
Darauf haben sie verzichtet.
Borisov in White Russia. During the advance, this was the temporary headquarters of Army Group Center, where Henning von Tresco played a key role. Over 50% of the population are Jewish, about 10,000 people. The ruined synagogue is the only sign of this today. In October 1941, Gottfried Reinhold, stationed here on a work detail, hears shocking rumors.
I can remember another forced laborer saying, "Jews are being executed over there. I've got to go and see that." I still remember. I was devastated that someone could say that.
One night in the ghetto, they round everybody up.
I saw a truck with elderly people climbing into it. Not really complaining, you could say. They must have guessed what was coming. And they were all driven there to some square or other, and they were all shot.
Hardly anyone from the ghetto survived. Only little Yuri Saharyevich managed to hide.
From the stories my grandmother told me, I know that my mother was taken away from the ghetto. They took her in the night, and the next morning they shot her.
On October the 21st and 22nd, 1941, at least 7,000 Jews were shot in Borisov, and many more died on the way to the execution sites.
I saw a baby in the ditch beside the road that had been shot.
All this happened at Colonel Henning von Tresco's front door. He knew about it. The persecution of the Jews has crossed the line to systematic genocide. Apparently, Tresco only now begins to take the crimes of the SS seriously. From here, it's a straight line to the assassination plans against Hitler. After studying the documents, this is what Johannes Hürter believes the evidence shows.
Daraus schließe ich, dass sie
One of my conclusions is that they accepted the murder of the Jews at the beginning, but that changed in the fall of 1941, when the SS units begin killing women and children too, on a massive scale. It's at that point that the moral outrage, the moral conscience, becomes stronger and become a powerful motive for their opposition to Hitler.
Gegen Hitler geworden.
Others judge Tresco's behavior less critically. Historian Johannes Tuchel is head of the memorial to the German resistance. His job includes researching the military resistance. He believes too much importance has been placed on the new Tresco documents.
Das ist doch nicht das geordnete
This isn't the sequential diary of Henning von Treschow. These are highly speculative items. We have single documents, individual reports on which there is a T. Trescho's initial next to a 1A, the initials of his position. That means he knew something. But please, show me the documents from which you can conclude that he approved of these things, supported them, or did anything more than just know about them.
Finally, Treschow and a few of his comrades realize that the executions have taken on a new dimension. The claims that these measures have a military justification no longer hold water. It's simply about the extermination of the Jews. The conspirators have come a long way, from support for Hitler to opposition, and then to resistance.
There's the Treschow who had an authoritarian mindset during the Weimar Republic. There's the Treschow who voted for Hitler. There's the Treschow who helped build the Wehrmacht. There's also the Treschow who was on the margins of the 1938 plot against Hitler, which planned to arrest him and prosecute him for crimes committed up to that point. Then there's the Henning von Treschow, who from the fall of 1941 is the driving force of the military's plans to overthrow Hitler. To say that he was in every sense, as we would understand it today, a pure Democrat, I believe is wishful thinking.
In 1942, Treschow takes a momentous decision. Hitler must be assassinated. He and his co-conspirators first attempt to win the support of the field marshals. One of the most prominent, Erich von Manstein, is approached several times to join the conspiracy. His reply is devastating. Prussian field marshals do not mutiny. The generals held as prisoners of war in England see it as a missed opportunity, as the transcripts of their conversations show.
When these civilians at home say to me, "You generals are to blame," I just say, "Us? We didn't choose him. It isn't our fault he became the legal supreme commander. We can't just incite mutiny." But then, who would mutiny?
Only one active field marshal will listen. Field Marshal Günther von Kluge, Treschow's superior officer, commanding general of Army Group Center. In March 1943, Hitler is expected on a visit to the front.
It was clear that when Hitler came to the front, his security cordon would be largely ineffective. He could only travel with a few people, so it must be possible to kill him. So we thought about how best to do it. It was clear that he had to be shot. The plan was that during lunch in the officers' mess, when Hitler was to address all the staff officers, my brother would give the signal, and then the officers who wanted to take part in the assassination would stand up and shoot at Hitler together. I'd kept Kluge informed. He'd agreed, even though it was dangerous for him, of course, because he would be sitting directly next to Hitler.
24-year-old Philipp von Boeselager, seen here on the right, is one of the chosen assassins. However, one's conscience alone doesn't always provide the whole answer.
Kluge called it off at the last moment. Originally, Himmler was supposed to accompany Hitler, but he cancelled at the last minute, and that's why Kluge called off the assassination, because he was afraid that it might otherwise result in a civil war between the SS and the army.
Later the same day, Treschow's people make a second assassination attempt. A bomb is smuggled on board Hitler's plane. It's disguised as a bottle of liqueur. It's supposed to explode on his return flight from Smolensk to the Führer headquarters, but the detonator fails in the freezing temperatures of the cargo hold. There are more assassination attempts, but they all fail. missed opportunities. In the summer of 1943, the Wehrmacht is losing almost 15,000 soldiers a week on the Eastern Front. The superiority of the Soviets is becoming more and more obvious. The last German offensive near Kursk is abandoned. There is more and more senseless sacrifice. How can one escape this horror? Those who follow their conscience without compromising pay a heavy price. Heinz Drossel sees what happens to a comrade.
A young soldier from Vienna, about 20 years old. He had been at the front for 3 days when he went to his ordnance officer, handed in all his weapons, and told him he wasn't going to take part in this war.
He's court-martialed. Drossel, who was a law student before the war, tries to get him to change his mind.
I said to him, "Think of your mother." He answered, "My mother will understand me. I am a person who was raised to respect human life." And if I take part in this war, then I'm compromising my beliefs. Please tell my mother exactly what happened.
Drossel's efforts are in vain. His final suggestion, shoot into the air instead, isn't an option for the young soldier. He's sentenced to death.
At 4 a.m., they came to get him, and I was allowed to go with him. He refused to be blindfolded and said a heartfelt goodbye to me. And then he was shot.
Cases like the Viennese soldier, where men refuse to take up arms, are rare. The Wehrmacht fights on. Very few recognize the criminal nature of this war of annihilation. The propaganda talks only of victories, especially in the early years.
The Wehrmacht had unbelievable successes that they showed in the newsreels. We saw huge prisoner of war camps with hundreds of thousands of captured Russians, 600,000 near Kiev, stretching all the way to the horizon. And then the cold Russian winter arrived. We knew that people couldn't survive at 35 below zero in the open. There were hundreds of thousands of them, millions. And that was a life-changing experience for me. I said to myself, no, I don't want to be part of this war. I don't want to be part of the crimes. I don't want to kill anyone. I simply want to live.
Ludwig Baumann is a sailor serving on the French Atlantic coast. The killing, horror, and hardship of the Eastern Front are a long way from occupied France. Occupation troops and units transferred from the Russian front for a rest enjoy peaceful times here, part of the reality of World War II. But Ludwig Baumann can't forget the brutal face of war in the East. For many, desertion is the only way to resist. Ludwig Baumann and a friend dare to do what others see as impossible or dishonorable.
We broke into the armory and took handguns and ammunition. Then we left the ship. It was a sort of floating barracks that we could leave in the evenings. The French were waiting around the corner with a truck. We got in the truck and they drove us to the border, and then drove back that night.
They flee to unoccupied Vichy France. They don't need to use their weapons. But they don't get far. At the frontier, they walk straight into a German border patrol. Ludwig Baumann and his friend are court-martialed for desertion.
We were sentenced to death in Bordeaux. The trial took 40 minutes. I was tortured during the interrogation and then in my cell on death row because I didn't betray my French friends, and neither did my friend. After 7 weeks, my sentence was reduced to 12 years in prison. But they didn't tell us, because there were other charges against us. I was on death row for 10 months. My hands and feet were chained night and day. Every morning when the guards changed, I thought, they're coming to get us. And when they passed the cell, I knew I was safe for another day. It was so dreadful that the trauma is still with me today.
Waiting on death row. German deserters share this fate with many Frenchmen. With the French resistance so active against German occupying forces, suspects are regularly brought before the courts. Death sentences are frequently passed, even on the innocent. And hostages are frequently executed in retaliation for the attacks of the resistance. These so-called measures of atonement are announced on posters. Corporal Kurt Helke finds them deeply disturbing.
In any case, these announcements, or rather the reports of the executions of the French resistance fighters, who were labeled terrorists, troubled me deeply. They made me think about what was happening, whether or not I could square it in my own mind with my own beliefs, if I could condone it.
For the time being, Kurt Helke continues to do his duty in Paris. But the time is coming when he will have to make a decision.
It could rebound on me any day. I could find myself standing in front of a group of Frenchmen who are fighting for their freedom, and I would have to shoot them. That was intolerable.
Almost 4,000 hostages are executed in France, and almost 70,000 Frenchmen are deported to concentration camps. Crimes against the civilian population didn't only take place in the occupied Soviet Union. Since the middle of February 1942, Karl-Heinrich von Stülpnagel has been military commander in France, the same general, educated in the humanities, who joined the plot against Hitler in 1938 and who resigned his post on the Eastern Front in 1941. But he still dutifully serves the Hitler regime. For some months, until an SS officer in Paris takes over the task in June 1942, he's also responsible for the execution of hostages. He signs death sentences and has Jews deported. Karl-Heinrich von Stülpnagel's son comments on the controversial role his father played.
According to Hitler's instructions, 570 hostages should have been shot in those 3 months. Only 177 were shot. And they were all people who'd previously been convicted. My father had a pool of condemned prisoners he did not have shot, but to whom he resorted when hostages were to be executed.
Kurt Helke finally makes a definite choice. As a teletype operator at the Navy's Western Command in Paris, he and 2 comrades form a resistance cell. The group has ties to the French resistance. Helke is given pamphlets calling for an end to the war. He distributes them everywhere German soldiers are to be found.
We handed them out however we could, in soldiers' barracks and soldiers' cinemas. We left them in vehicles and in parked trucks. If the window was a bit open, we would throw them in. And because the metro was used a lot by the soldiers, we put them in the metro.
Opposition from below. a handful of men and women who can't guess that General Karl-Heinrich von Stülpnagel, their commanding officer in Paris, is pursuing goals similar to theirs. Even while he's still responsible for the execution of French hostages, he's in contact with the resistance within the Wehrmacht. They are still plotting Hitler's overthrow in spite of all the failures, and the driving force of the conspiracy is Colonel Henning von Tresckow. In the summer of 1943, he's temporarily transferred to Berlin. In the capital city, he makes further contacts with the civilian resistance and like-minded officers. Since September 1943, Klaus Schenk Graf von Stauffenberg is one of them. He's a staff officer in the Reserve Army, based in their central Berlin headquarters, the Bendler Block. All of the troops that are not at the front belong to the Reserve Army, among them the powerful occupying forces in France. At this time, Tresckow's office is also located in the Bendler Block. In the staff of the Reserve Army, Stauffenberg is responsible for writing emergency orders for the entire force. The code word Valkyrie will trigger their dispatch from Berlin as emergency measures to quell domestic unrest. Stauffenberg and Tresckow change the orders. The new version authorizes the Reserve Army to march against the SS and every party office, even in the occupied territories, should Hitler be assassinated. Meanwhile, the Reich is moving more and more onto the defensive. In June 1944, Allied troops land in Normandy. Military defeat is imminent. The conspirators are forced to act. Henning von Tresckow is promoted to Major General and is transferred back to the Eastern Front in command of a division. In his new position, he's unable to intervene in the plot in Berlin. But since the invasion, he's been urging the others to act. There's not much time left. There are still far too few conspirators, but that's not what matters to Tresckow. He says,
"The assassination must take place, whatever the cost. The essential point is not the practical aim, but that the German resistance dared to take the decisive gamble before the world and before history."
Words of a lonely hero. But there is a practical aim. Only Hitler's death can secure a truce with the Western Allies and allow the Eastern Front to be held. Hitler is at his headquarters, the Wolf's Lair. Stauffenberg decides to plant the bomb himself. Then he'll fly back to Berlin to direct the coup d'etat. At Trent Park, German generals and colonels speak openly about Stauffenberg. In the wake of the assassination attempt, they're torn between admiration and surprise.
Stauffenberg, now he always had
What a man. A noble, decent human being.
A man with principles.
The model of a decent, intelligent general staff officer. A man with the welfare of his troops at heart.
One couldn't have wished for a better and a more intelligent staff officer.
It was a pleasure to have worked with a man like him back then.
20th of July, 1944, Hitler's headquarters, shortly before 1 p.m. Stauffenberg, the would-be assassin, returns to Berlin. From his office in the Bendler Block, he means to issue orders to arrest all of Hitler's main party cronies. 4:30 p.m. The Valkyrie order is dispatched to every office of the Wehrmacht with the following declaration.
The Führer, Adolf Hitler, is dead. In this hour of extreme danger, the government of the Reich has imposed a state of emergency in order to maintain law and order.
In Paris, General von Stülpnagel waits impatiently for news. He's in the know and ready to follow the conspirators. In his area of jurisdiction, he plans to disarm the SS and the rest of Hitler's loyal power base. He's just waiting for the signal to act. But Hitler is alive, as all the conspirators in Berlin now know. In Paris, von Stülpnagel begins to take the measures called for in the Valkyrie order. arresting the SS and the party's security service, the SD. The coup d'etat is supposed to function just like this in every military district of the Reich. Stülpnagel's superior is the man who was ready to go along with assassination plans a year before, Field Marshal Günther von Kluge, now Commander-in-Chief West. Together with Cäsar von Hofacker, Stauffenberg's cousin, Stülpnagel goes to Kluge's headquarters on the evening of July the 20th. If the coup succeeds, at least in Paris, it could be the beginning of the end of the Nazi regime.
My father and
Hofacker had a meeting with Kluge, who in the meantime knew for sure that Hitler was alive. My father and Hofacker tried to persuade him to join them. But then came that famous sentence of his, "Yes, if only the bastard were dead."
Günther von Kluge turns them down. Perhaps he believes that a coup can only lead to chaos, or perhaps he wants to save his own skin.
In the course of the war, Kluge had been entirely ready to move towards the opposition, or even the resistance. But they had to be successful. He didn't want to go down in history as a traitor. That is a motive among these high-ranking generals that one shouldn't underestimate.
It wasn't just Kluge. All the field marshals refused to participate in the resistance when it counted. Together they could have saved millions of lives lost in the final months of the war. There were as many victims in the last 10 months of the war as there had been in the previous 5 years. The Wehrmacht as an instrument of resistance would remain the dream of a handful of hopeful conspirators.
It was because there were too few people opposing Hitler. If you think about the other questions that have been asked, why didn't the Prussian officers do it better? My counter-argument is this: how could they do it better when there were so few of them?
And yet for a long time, it seemed as if the esprit de corps, the bond between the generals and senior officers, might achieve something against Hitler and his followers. No one betrayed the conspirators, even though very many people were in the know. However, within the Wehrmacht, that loyalty was only enough to guarantee silence, not to act. Some of the officers at Trent Park expressed their surprise at this lack of resolve.
Most of the army knew about the 20th of July, you know?
No.
It was discussed incredibly often.
No, I don't believe that.
They even consulted the commanders of the individual armies beforehand.
The situation of the plotters in Berlin is hopeless. Later in the evening of July the 20th, Stauffenberg and 3 of his co-conspirators are executed at the Bendler block. Henning von Treschow, long the leader of the resistance within the Wehrmacht, learns early the next morning that the coup d'etat has failed. In the papers he left behind, he wrote,
"I played for high stakes. If you lose a trick like that, you have to take the consequences."
Henning von Treschow was no saint, but a child of his times. Above all, he wanted to serve his country, first as a supporter of Hitler, then as his bitter adversary. He was the exception among the generals. Many of them were against Hitler when defeat became inevitable, but few chose active resistance. and only a small number of individuals became conspirators on moral grounds because of the millions of murders. Men like Henning von Treschow, when his conscience forced him to, he put his life on the line. He knew that he had at least made his mark. Karl-Heinrich von Stülpnagel is dismissed. By the time he finally, openly took the side of the assassins, accepting the risks involved, it was already too late. Beside the Maas near Verdun, Stülpnagel reaches for his service pistol. The suicide attempt fails. Stülpnagel is blinded. He's nursed back to health and is executed by hanging at Plötzensee in Berlin, like many of the other conspirators. Hitler takes bloody revenge. Almost 200 conspirators are executed, among them many officers from the 9th Potsdam Infantry Regiment. In France, Kurt Helker joins the resistance. He continues his attempts to persuade German soldiers to give up their pointless war. He survives. At the end of the war, Ludwig Baumann is in a penal battalion at the front. For decades, he's ostracized as a deserter. He still campaigns for the rehabilitation of alleged traitors. Towards the end of the war, Heinz Drossel rescues a Jewish family from certain death. The State of Israel later names him one of the righteous among the nations. After the war, he becomes a judge. The resistance to Hitler has failed, and those officers who closed their eyes to the crimes of the Nazi regime can do nothing to prevent the final defeat. But by then, the war has claimed millions more lives.